Yeah, maybe we'll give people another minute or so to get in before we start really digging in. But thank you so much for our panel for being here, all four of you. And thank you so much for everyone who's joined us. We're looking forward to tonight. I'm really excited that each and every one of you could be here, and I'm really excited about our panel. We have Senator Brownsberger, Representative Rogers, Ms. Johnson, and Chief MacIsaac with us today. And I think I'm really excited to hear what each of you has to say, and then for all of us to get the chance to ask questions and dialogue with you. So thank you. And I guess on that note, it's, I feel like this is me. I feel like it's a tiny bit early, but we should just get started, right, guys?
Yes.
So thanks for being here. And this panel tonight is the first in a 4-part event. So we'll be holding future panels in February, March, and April. Our series is called Beyond 2020, Police Reform in Massachusetts in 2021. And we'll publish information about our upcoming panels on our website, causnewengland.org. And you'll probably receive some emails about them from me too. So we're excited to have our wonderful panel this evening and to hear from them and engage in dialogue on this important issue. And we are tonight heartened by the passing of, even if it's a limited version of the original bill, we're heartened by the passing of the bill last month. But we do want to recognize the purpose of this panel is to sort of look ahead into 2021 and the continued work that we all have to do. And, on that note, we invited Kim Haley-Jackson, and I know you have to jump off to another meeting. Kim is the vice chair of the Belmont Human Rights Commission, to join us and speak on the events of the Capitol from last week, particularly in light of the looking ahead to the work that we have to do in 2021. I think it's important that we kind of take some space to frame our conversation around those events. So thank you, Kim, for being here, because I know you're busy and a lot of people want you. Kim.
I actually think that we may have lost her.
We may have lost her.
Sounds like she had some connectivity issues.
Okay. Well, I mean, I can share a little bit of what Kim and I have discussed so Kim is the vice chair of the Belmont Human Rights Commission, and both COS, along with the BHRC, condemns the attack on the Capitol last week. And we would just like to call attention to the fact that during the past year, protesters have been systematically attacked, gassed, violently arrested by law enforcement officers. In contrast, amongst the white supremacist terrorists, the insurrectionists at the Capitol last week were law enforcement authorities and police officers on and off duty. If it was not already abundantly clear from the Blue Lives Matter movement that's arisen as a direct response to the Black Lives Matter organizing in the past few years, or the reaction of law enforcement around the country to decent Americans protesting for the civil rights of all, last week's events make it starkly clear that our law enforcement agencies are rooted in racist ideology, and that it's up to good citizens around the country, like ourselves, to insist that 2021 be the year that we hold local departments as well as state and federal agencies accountable for eliminating racists and bigots from their ranks. Well, we're glad to see that today Donald J. Trump has been impeached now for the second time. It's important, we'll clap for that. It's important that we publicly acknowledge the issue at the Capitol, and leading up to it is not his responsibility alone, but instead took the complicity of citizens and law enforcement from around the country, including many in our own state. So COS, and again, this is me speaking, not Kim and the BHRC, but COS along with the BHRC definitely will continue to work together and to fight racism in Belmont and the Boston area, and specifically to focus on the complicity and the racism within departments. Not naming any in particular, but in our region in general. Is Kim back with us now? No.
No.
So I think one of the ways that this work will be done that's really important is just to grow in collaboration with a wide variety of community groups. And that's one of the reasons that we're so happy to see all of you here. Many of you are working in your own communities, if not in Belmont, on anti-racist work. And we would like to continue to work together and as activists and advocates in the new year. And on that note, I would like to introduce our panel, who are some of the people who worked the most hard on police reform in 2020. And we're excited to hear about their work and what they're looking ahead to in 2021. So I'll introduce them in the order that they're going to speak, but not in their order of importance, because they're all an important part of this panel. And we're so excited to have each one of them there. We have this evening with us Senator Will Brownsberger, who reps the 2nd Suffolk and Middlesex, and is a progressive Democrat committed to building a future that we can all believe in, and who has been a tireless champion of the police reform bill in Massachusetts. So thank you for all of your work. We also have Representative Dave Rogers, who reps the 24th Middlesex District, and who works tirelessly to lead in the fight for economic and social justice on behalf of all of us, his constituents. Well, myself as a constituent and many of you, and likewise has devoted himself so much in the past year to this reform bill. So thank you again. And Chief Jamie MacIsaac, the chief of the Belmont Police Department, who we so appreciate the time and his consistent effort to show up at community meetings like this one, and also at meetings of groups like Belmont Against Racism and the Belmont Human Rights Commission. So thank you for all of your time. And potentially saving our best for last, although everybody is appreciated, Miss Latisha Johnson, who's both a community advocate and assistant secretary for the Boston NAACP, who is a dedicated and devoted advocate and engages on so many levels and in different capacities with the Boston community. And we're so lucky to have you here with us tonight in Belmont, quote unquote. So thank you all. And I think as far as our agenda for this evening, what we will do is have our speakers speak for about 10 minutes each. And then once we've heard from all of you, we'll open up the panel for discussion between you. And then later for our questions. So once we open up for questions, we'll let you guys know, we'll let all of the public know to put your questions in the chat so that we can start dialoguing with everyone. Okay. Senator Brownsberger, thank you so much for being here. I think you're still muted. I can't hear you quite yet.
Here we go. How's that? So look, this is a big year. In so many ways, but in the legislature on police reform, it was a big year. And what we did was what I would call, first and foremost, a reform bill, a bill about changing policing in Massachusetts. That means it's a bill about making policing better. Now, there's people who would, and there's an argument, and I want to get to that, and there's further work to be done about things other than policing, alternatives to policing, and so forth. But this bill, what we did was, I think, a very strong reform bill. And what it does, in a nutshell, is sets new standards for the use of force and empowers a new commission, to regulate policing. and to introduce transparency and accountability into police discipline. Too often in small departments and in big departments, there are a lot, I want to just say it, right? There are lots of great departments, lots of great officers in this state, but there are problem officers and there are problem departments, and we need to do a better job of addressing those problems. This bill creates an agency that really has the power to do that. Number one, it can hear complaints from any place. So it's not dependent on complaints bubbling up through departments. People can go directly to this commission and lodge a complaint. Number two, this commission has the power to investigate complaints itself when it wants to. It has audit powers, it has subpoena powers, it's will have the resources, its own investigative staff to get to the bottom of situations. And finally, it has the power, when it is merited, when there's been serious misconduct, to take away the license of a police officer. First of all, you didn't need a license to be a police officer before this bill, but in effect, you will need a license to be a police officer. Existing police officers will be deemed to be licensed, but people will be exposed to the possibility of losing their license in case of serious misconduct. And if they lose their license, they will not work again in law enforcement in Massachusetts, or really very likely any place in the country. So it's a very powerful sanction, and of course, we want to do intermediate sanctions and as needed. But I think that this commission has very likely will change the tenor of policing in the departments where it needs to be changed. And I want to talk about the commission itself just for a minute. This is a commission which is civilian majority commission. In most other states, essentially every other state, the regulatory body is comprised of law enforcement officers. It's, if you look at the appointing list, it's comprised of, the heads of the various different police departments in the state. In this bill, in this commission, which is a 9-member commission, 3 members will be police officers, but 6 members will be non-law enforcement, required to be non-law enforcement. And of those 6, half will be appointed by justice-oriented organizations, 1 by the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, the commissioners of which are all people of color, 1 by the National Association of Social Workers, a very progressive humanistic organization, and 1 by the Civil Rights section of the Massachusetts Bar Association, which is a very justice-oriented group. So I think, the governor and the attorney general are going to be appointing from people nominated by those organizations. And by the way, one of the police officers is required to be nominated is required to be selected from a list submitted by the Massachusetts Association of Minority Law Enforcement Officers. So I think we're going to have pretty good representation of minorities on this commission. I think we're going to have a solid, high-quality commission with a lot of power. I think we're going to have a commission that is oriented to justice. And I think over the next 5 years, we're going to look back and say, you know what, this thing really made a difference. In the quality of policing. There's a conversation to turn to the issue of what needs to be done beyond that. I think there's lots of work that needs to be done beyond that. And I would put that in 2 broad categories. One is we need to think about how we respond to problems in the community. Are there other resources that we can put on a standby availability to intervene that are different from police resources when that's appropriate? We're always going to, I'm not someone who thinks we should defund the police. I think we need police. We're always going to need people who are ready to run into dangerous situations and use force when necessary. But I do think there are plenty of situations where that kind of response is not what's appropriate. And sometimes in many communities, police are involved in situations that perhaps could be solved in a different way. And so we have to think about, are there additional resources, not taking it away, but not taking policing away, because you need that standby resource. You need those folks there. They're like firefighters. We only have about 1 fire, house fire in in Belmont a year, but you have to have your firefighters there, 24/7, 365 days a year. And the same thing for the police. You're rarely going to have, a really violent incident in Belmont, but we need the police there for when that does happen. And there are domestic violence incidents and other incidents where you need that strength to come into a difficult situation. But agreeing that, are there mental health situations where it's traumatizing to see someone show up with a blue, wearing blue and carrying a gun? What are the other different kind of minor offenses where, again, you don't want to criminalize it? Can you have a social work response? That's one line of question, one line of thought that I think we need to work forward on. And then the other line of thought I think that is important is we have to think about, root causes of crime and crime prevention, and what should we be doing to make it so we don't see kids involved. And I'm just going to say young men, because it is men. What we're talking about in poverty communities in the state, communities like Roxbury, communities like Lynn, Lawrence, Brockton, where you've got folks where there's really high rates of violence, and we have to address that. And taking the police away is not the solution to that violence, but maybe policing alone is not the solution either. Maybe what we need to be thinking about is more youth workers and jobs and that whole long-term conversation that is not a new conversation, but we have to ask what we're not doing that we could be doing to make it so people aren't doing the things that get them in trouble with the police and result in incarceration and are a burden on the community. I mean, so those are the challenges, the twin challenges, I think, that go beyond reform of policing. I think the reform of policing was important, but I think we need to think about alternative responses to problems when they happen. And I think we need to be thinking much more about what do we do to prevent problems, crime from happening in the first place. And those are both things that I want to keep thinking about and talking about and moving forward on. And not to say they're new things or that we haven't been doing those things, because I think we have in the legislature. There's some things in this bill that speak to that, and there's lots of things that speak to both dimensions of that. But there's a lot more work to be done. Thank you. Thank you for having this. Thank you for including me.
Thank you so much for being here. And I definitely took notes on your calls to action at the end. Thank you for that. I love that. Representative Rogers, thank you for being here tonight.
Well, thank you, and thanks for organizing this wonderful event, and hello to all who have tuned in. Happy New Year. Hello to my fellow panelists. And as I say, it's wonderful to be here with you. We just have lived through an extraordinary year, I think, unlike probably any of us have experienced. So we did a pretty sweeping police reform bill. That's really a landmark piece of legislation. I really want to recognize my colleague, Senator Brownsberger, who was the lead negotiator in the Senate. So anytime the version in the House and the Senate is different, and they're almost always different, what's called a conference committee is appointed. That's 3 members of the Senate, 3 of the House, to literally exchange drafts back and forth, negotiating those differences. And our own Senator Brownsberger was the lead negotiator for the Senate and played a really significant role here. So I want to tip my hat to him.
Thank you for that, Dave. Thank you.
And this is a difficult issue. To give you a sense of that, even after the heinous murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, here in true blue liberal Massachusetts, 34 Democrats in the House of Representatives, the state House of Representatives, voted no on police reform. 34, there's 160 of us, 34 Democrats voted no. And it gives you a sense of how controversial, contentious this issue is. But we did pass it. We got it over the finish line. And has many pretty dramatic reforms. A truly independent commission, as Senator Brownsberger said, made up of 9. Many other states, that's part of the under the umbrella of a law enforcement agency. 6 of these 9 commissioners will not have any background in law enforcement. 3 will. They have great powers, as I said, subpoena power. Officers will be certified and can be decertified. We also took significant action on the use of force, banning chokeholds, establishing a duty to intervene. So we all were horrified to watch in Minneapolis as the 4 other officers were standing around as that officer had his knee on George Floyd's neck. And so we just passed a law that if you're an officer and you see that going on, it's not you should intervene. You have a duty, a legal duty to intervene. We put limits on no-knock warrants. It's really a long list. Another piece is a bill that I introduced working with the American Civil Liberties Union to put some limits on facial recognition software. Law enforcement in our state was using it unfettered without any limits. So what came to light is law enforcement was going to the RMV, the Registry of Motor Vehicles, where of course they have your license plate photograph, and running searches without a warrant, without any kind of constraints. And so I introduced a bill to say, hey, we've got to look at this. We ended up coming up with a compromise solution that there'll have to be a court order. They'll have to publish, law enforcement agencies will have to publish a disaggregated listing of all the times that they've done this. And frankly, the bill as originally passed by the House and Senate went further, but Governor Baker amended it. And given that we had 34 Democrats in the House that voted no, we didn't have the votes to override the governor. And that's fine. You know, sometimes compromise is important and we can revisit the issue. We established a number of permanent commissions going forward to study further a lot of the issues around policing, systemic racism. And so on school resource officers, we took action. You know, a lot of schools have a school resource officer now. The superintendent will have to request that a school officer be appointed. And we put a provision for a memorandum of understanding so that there's a model memorandum between the police and the schools as to how that will work. And so we have an expungement piece in the bill. We have penalties for submitting a false time report. There's been scandals, frankly, in the state police with falsified time reports. We have a piece on that. And frankly, I could go on at some greater length of a number of other provisions. So it's a pretty dramatic, pretty sweeping bill. And we did touch qualified immunity. That's a controversial area of the law. We established that any officer that is decertified by that commission, that new completely independent commission, will no longer have the protection of qualified immunity, and appointed a commission to study that further should there be additional reforms. You know, make no mistake, this was a bold piece of legislation, pretty far-reaching. Now, that doesn't mean we'll stop work. I mean, the work continues. And we'll continue there's the commissions that established, I think literally 8 or 9 commissions that'll be funded with experts to study some of these issues. So the work will be ongoing. And, you know, I do have to say this to my friends, the 34 who voted against it. And by the way, they're fine, able, hardworking public servants. But I don't think it's a vote that will age well in their careers as they look back. And some of these people, you know, my colleagues and my friends, I go to lunch with them, whatever, I know them. But I've had pretty frank conversations with some of them. But this is also not about trying to be adversarial toward law enforcement. We have, as Senator Brownsberger said, so many fine officers who really are really wonderful public servants. We saw the storming of the Capitol. I don't know if we can get into that discussion. It's a little bit off topic, but many of the officers tried to hold the line. And there was the video you saw of that one officer, one against a mob, trying to hold them back and divert them. Imagine the stress you'd be under. I mean, we have our own chief, Jamie MacIsaac, who put out an amazing statement after the killing of George Floyd, and who's been really forward-leaning and forward-thinking on these issues. So there are a lot of wonderful public servants doing policing work. It's important we say that. It's not about saying, officers and law enforcement are bad. It's about saying, what are some sensible reforms, given some of the tragedies we've seen around the country and the systemic racism that need to be put in place? And I think we've made a really bold step in that way. There's more to be done, and more will be done. But I felt really good. I worked hard on this with so many of you, partners in the community, constituents who called me, emailed me, and weighed in with their thoughts and ideas and opinions. So I look forward to a dialogue, and I think it's great that you're hosting this event, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much for being there. And as a teacher, I'm particularly interested in what you started speaking about regarding school resource officers, because that's been such a big conversation in education circles for so many years. So thank you for bringing that up, amongst everything else. Thank you. And Ms. Johnson, do you have time to stay with us for just a few more minutes so we can hear from you?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I know. Thank you. Well, with no further ado, you're here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
I'm new to this. I'm not here on behalf of the NAACP because we have a spokesperson for this, but I am here as a community advocate where I do support a lot of things that happen to do with our community. Far as education, I'm there to support. The health committee, I'm there to support. The legal justice, I'm here to support on anything that needs improving on things that are broken. And so I can go on and on because I sit in a lot of chairs, in a lot of seats of a lot of things that affect our community, far as Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. I don't know too much about Belmont that much, you know what I mean? But I'm learning and I'm reading more. But far as Boston goes, I see some improvement. You know what I mean? I see a lot of improvement on education. I see a lot of improvement on health. Far as with the police department, I see a lot of change. A lot of them get more educated on a lot of things that were kind of uncontrollable. And I wouldn't say uncontrollable. It's more like that was just outrageous, on certain things, like the gentleman said about the what is he? I forgot what he said. He said a lot. I was paying attention, and I like what he said. And kudos to that, because one thing I like when someone says when certain things need approval and it gets done. It doesn't just say it just needs it, but it just happens. I like that very, very much. Well, I can go on and on. I can go on and on. And I mean, that's basically all I can say for now, but
thank you so much. I know you might have to jump off and then come back in when we're sort of chatting. So I think it would be interesting for me, at least, to hear more about some of the programming that you really see as working, and to think about ways that we not just in the immediate Boston community, but like we as greater Boston community can kind of
Yes.
come together and support each other. And I
Yes.
think I really see the connection between the work that you're talking about and what Senator Brownsberger was referring to, which is sort of like, this is two parts, you know, this isn't
Yeah.
just abolish or defund, but this is really like, where can we concentrate so that we can, where can we concentrate our energy as a community so that we can support folks in
Yeah,
ways.
especially the our young generation. I mean, our young generation needs a lot. You know what I mean?
Right.
They're a little bit confused on a lot of things, and it's a lot of mental health. A lot. I mean, I see a lot of kids always talking about they depressed. You know what I mean? Since this COVID-19 started, and they're home on laptops, now they complain about their eyes hurting. You know what I mean? It's a lot going on as far as in the health. And I have a 16-year-old daughter. You know what I mean? And she talks about how she's starting to be depressed a lot. You know what I mean? And in order for her to go back to school, she has to take this shot. You know what I mean? And to me, you shouldn't be forced to take the shot to go back to school because you probably have certain health reasons, certain health problems, you know? And so that's the biggest thing with me is people, they are forcing them to take these things, and it's putting them under pressure where it's going to be a big problem. It's going to be a real big problem starting to go back to school. So that'll be my biggest thing that we need to improve on as far as that, you know, and the education, you know, that's very important for me too as well. You know, a lot of people feel that they're not getting their education fully on Zoom. You know what I mean? They'd rather be in school. So I understand that too as well. So it's a lot that I'm dealing with when it comes to a lot of committees. You know what I mean? We're trying our best, you know what I mean? But if anyone here knows any solutions or anything that will make it better, you know what I mean, as far as with our young generation, I would love to hear it. And I will pass it on.
Wait, that's why you're here though. You're supposed to tell us the answer.
I mean, I don't have all the, I mean, I can't do it by myself, you know?
I got you,
can't do it
Latisha.
by
I got you.
myself.
I got
That's
plenty
right, me too.
of ideas.
Well, thank you so much. And I know, like, if you do need to jump off and then come back in, whenever you have time to come back, we're going to be excited to discuss more. I kind
Okay.
of broke my own rules because I started chatting with you before we had a chance to hear from Chief MacIsaac. And thank you so much for being here. And I know how much you show up to so many meetings like this.
Yeah,
So thank you for your time.
And thank you for having me, and it's nice meeting everyone.
Thank you so much.
All
And
right.
Chief, thank you too.
Thank you.
Bye, Latisha. Chief, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, for inviting me tonight. I think this is great. I'd never miss an opportunity to talk to people about my profession. I just want to say, if you see me turning red, it's not stress or anger. We're in temporary trailers and it's about 100 degrees in here right now. Right? So, but you know, this was certainly, you know, anybody who's tuned in to law enforcement and paying attention to things, you know, throughout the country, this reform shouldn't come as a surprise that this was coming. And you know, a lot of the things, the Post, you know, I think Mass Chiefs for a number of years had talked about supporting a licensing for police officers. It makes sense. We were one of the few states that didn't have it. This is a very big bill. I think is it 87 sections. And I think right now in law enforcement, where we stand is, well, not where we stand, but what we actually talked about today is how this is all going to be implemented. As Representative Rogers said, there's a number of commissions. What concerns me is, and just for people who aren't from Belmont, one of the things I like to, I focus on Belmont. I'm not an expert of what goes on in law enforcement and in other communities. law enforcement isn't a one size fits all. So maybe what they do in somebody else's community, we necessarily don't do here. But I think what concerns me in Belmont is any of the unfunded liabilities that might come along with this. Because we're an agency where we're 49 sworn officers and we have a civilian staff, not counting dispatches of 3. So a place like Cambridge, I go over there and I marvel at the resources they have. They have an attorney on staff, and so when somebody says, hey, you got to come up with a policy, they can create one. I'm concerned about what kind of challenges that's going to pose for a department of our size. As Senator Brownsberger said, so I've been the chief now for 1 year and 13 days. And as Dave Rogers says, this has been a remarkable year. My head has been spinning from when I took over. But when I interviewed for the job, they asked me, they said, if you had an unlimited budget, what would you have? What would you add to your police department? And I said, 2 social workers and 2 paralegals. And, I believe that today. I believe that they have a place in law enforcement. Watertown, I know, has, I think, 2, and Arlington may have 2. And we, unfortunately, with the budget stretched thin in Belmont, we're trying to get one that will work with the Council on Aging and the Belmont Police. But that's a no-brainer. For years in law enforcement, we went to budget meetings and said, we're being asked to do things that we shouldn't be asked to do. And, what this, and now, there's people talking about presenting a relief for those things. No officer wants to go to somebody's house 25 times in a month because they're having, a psychotic episode or they're living in crisis. And so, those are things that I think as communities and as a society, we have to talk about better ways to address those individuals. The post, they can have a commission that studies civil service. I think that's great. I think the 2 concerns that most law enforcement officers have, and that is very new to us. So we in the Belmont Police in 2019, we decided we wanted to have a really, really good sound use of force policy. So we worked on one and we adopted one, and Captain Herr, who's retired, he deserves a lot of credit for that. And when the 8 Can't Wait came out, with the 8 policy things that people were saying we should have in our policies, I reread the policy and I said, wow, we meet all 8. But what's different for law enforcement is now that those policies are basically law, right? So as Representative Rogers said, so in the police environment, so we have in our policy that every officer has a duty to intervene if they see another officer using excessive force. So let's, for hypothetical, pretend it's, it's not big excessive force, but it's excessive force. And we have an officer that stands by and watches, and we learn about that and we conduct an investigation. Well, pre-police reform, that's a policy violation. So we would use progressive discipline. We would use, we might retraining, it might be a verbal warning, depending on how hard it was. It might be a written or even a suspension, all the way up to termination. So now with the reform bill, that officer would violate the law. And so that would go to post. And I think that's what concerns a lot of officers is how that process is gonna evolve and to what degree. I think, reading the bill and these commissions, there's a lot of heavy lifting coming down the road for these commissions and for the post. I mean, when you think about every police department in the state is going to be submitting internal investigations and discipline records, it's a lot of work. I'm sure, they've thought of it. And then afterwards, it'll be a lot. You'll have people, throughout the Commonwealth, that there's people that sometimes, hesitant, as we all know, to go to the local police if they feel as though they've been wronged. And now they'll have post, which is a good thing, but they'll have a lot of people coming to them. But we're gonna adapt and work. And I think I'm real interested to see what the commissions come up with. I think the positive is I think that this will go a long way to improving relationships between police and minority communities. And, it will be, I think, we'll see how it works out. But I think there's going to be a lot of, regulations and things like that we'll have to see how it evolves.
Thank you so much, Chief. And I think that, your point is well taken, that there are, individual departments will interact with this reform bill differently. And that will increase, I think, the amount of work for those that are overseeing it. And yeah, that is a big deal. And I like that that you ended also in an optimistic way, that we hope that this is a relationship that this will eventually become a relationship building tool, or in any event serve in that way.
Yeah, and as Senator Brownsberger once said, we were at a community meeting, I think 4 or 5 years ago, and it involved young kids from Belmont. I think it was a Black and Belmont group, and everybody in there was like-minded, and including my former chief McLaughlin and Captain Herr and myself. And Senator Brownsberger said, at some point you have to reach out to those that think differently than you do, and try to work together. And that's kind of been my theme. And if I can be a conduit to build those bridges, I'm certainly more than welcome to do that, because I think it's very important. I think, we've seen that, the division in this country needs to, we need to find ways to come together.
Agreed. Well, there's 50 of us here that are making that effort right now. Well, what our plan was for, we lost one of our panelists for at least the time being. So our plan was for the three of you to be able to sort of chat about your work. And so I wonder if either of you would like to comment on anything that you heard each other say. It might help us as the public better understand some of the details of what you were discussing, so that when we get a chance to ask you questions, we may be even better informed. Or it may help answer some of the questions that we had as we were going into it. So if in the event that you feel like, you don't have questions for each other, then maybe we'll move on. But if there's anything that you would like to, Senator, I can't hear you, sorry.
Yep, no, I'm unmuting. I started to move my mouth before I moved my hands. Yeah, look, I want to say, I just want to respond a little bit to what Jamie was saying about the use of force things and the regulations. I want to, of course, just take the opportunity to give, in case people are getting to know Jamie. Jamie's MacIsaac. Belmont is so blessed to have Jamie MacIsaac in the leadership role that he's in. He's the real deal as a police officer, and his heart is 100% in the right place. And so I think Belmont is just really fortunate, and we're going to have him for, I hope a good long time. Coming in young enough to have a long tenure and make a real difference. But Peter Herr, outgoing, was the department's internal audit officer, which is, or I don't know what you call them, but basically the guy who does the investigations of other officers, which is a very thankless job, especially in a small department. He is an expert on use of force, and we did talk to Peter. I mean, Peter reached out, and we did talk to him as we were developing this bill. And there is a feature of the bill that's really comes out of those conversations, which is that we recognized that we wanted to to send a strong message and create rules that would result in the use of de-escalation before force. I mean, reducing the use of force broadly to the extent possible. One of the things we realized, though, through Peter's conversations was, look, you've written rules that would actually make it impossible for us to do our job in certain situations. I mean, if I read these rules literally, I couldn't grab a kid's hand as he was throwing a brick through the window. I mean, because that's not one of the allowed purposes for use of force. So we did create this regulatory exception, which basically said, look, you're going to have as to non-deadly force, you're going to, the commission, the Civilian Control Commission would have the authority to promulgate some regulations which would define more sensitively, more realistically, the use of the occasions in which force can be used. And as it happened in the final bill, that those regulations will be written by this subordinate organization called the, today it's called the Municipal Police Training Council. It has a new name under our legislation, but it's basically the same entity. That is a law enforcement group, but they will be approved. They'll be subject to approval by the civilian organization. So I think we're going to end up with use of force rules that are, on the one hand, practical, and on the other hand, will make a real difference. That's my hope. And I think the accountability and the enforcement is what's ultimately going to make the biggest difference.
Thank you, Senator.
Actually, I have a question for the chief. He said a lot of really interesting, thoughtful things. And, one thing I hear a lot at the State House when we're debating police reform is, we ask officers to do things that frankly might be more appropriate for a social worker or someone with psychological training. And you yourself mentioned that, Watertown has 2 social workers, and if you had the budget for it, you would hire a social worker, obviously without really revealing confidences or anything in any citizen's name. I mean, I wonder if you could just sort of describe a little bit about the kind of calls you might get that involve mental health issues, or because I'm sure that's really challenging for an officer. You show up, and so anyway, yeah, that's something I'm curious about.
I'll give you an example. We have, this has been going on for about 6 months now. We have a resident who's living in crisis who is, exhibiting, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know, but exhibiting sort of what you call paranoid behavior. Calls the station all the time, shouting profanities. Not only calls our station, but calls other stations. So other stations call us and then tell us we have to do a well-being, we want you to go by and do a well-being check on this person. So we're constantly in contact with him. He's constantly, calling us and coming in here and yelling. And we call the therapist all the time. We call family members, and there is really nothing. Everyone says there's nothing we can do. So in a situation like that, if we had an in-house person that maybe could act as a buffer, when this person comes in and feels like shouting and swearing at somebody, and we wouldn't put that person in proximity where they would get hurt, but would have the skills to deal with that person, on another level. And that we've had instances with people that had called us and said, I need you to come to my house. I'm off my meds. And we go to the house, and the person's in the street, and they're, swinging sticks and everything else. And, that's someone that if we had an in-house clinician could call that person every week, hey, X, how are you doing? Are you taking your medications? Are you, and there could be a liaison to the person's therapist, because, police officers work a 4-on, 2-off schedule. So, it's hard for a patrol officer to follow up. And then we have our division, we have a community service lieutenant who does the best she can. She works with elderly, she works with people in crisis. So we know who they are, and we go there a number of times. So oftentimes in Belmont, a lot of our people in crisis calls are at halfway houses that exist in the community, that are people that have services, and if we had a liaison that could work with whoever was, managing the house, or talk, or even if we just got a heads up from them and said, hey, I know you have a clinician, we have a client coming in who's might be a handful. There's a lot of uses for a social worker. a clinician in those areas.
Uh,
And the last thing a police officer wants to do is hurt somebody who's in crisis. It's absolutely the last thing that they want to do. And when I was hired, we had a meeting, and we had a all hands on deck meeting. Everyone was there, and we laid out our priorities. And one of them was people in crisis. And my order to the officers was, you spend as much time as needed on that call. I don't care if we pay 3 hours of overtime for that person to get services, because I think in my experience over the years, a lot of these calls can go bad when officers feel as though they got to bring something to a conclusion, or they have to end the call. So we tell our officers, you spend as much time as needed when you're on one of these calls. I don't care if you have to wait for a parent to drive from Cape Cod to Belmont to take care of the person. So that's one of the ways we address the calls.
Yeah, we had a question ahead of time about this. Actually, they wanted to know, do you have an estimate of like how much work this would relieve officers of if you had social workers, if you had the 2 social workers?
Well, as Senator Brownsberger alluded to this, so these cases or these individuals come across our path. Usually when they're in crisis, they're in their family is in crisis. They don't know what to do, so they call 911 and they say, my son and my daughter's out of control. Can you please come by the house and try to control them? So there's calls where it's a police response, regardless if we had a clinician or not. I would say that there's enough work for us to certainly have one social worker, working Monday through Friday or on call on a couple of weekends. The real nice thing would be to have 2, maybe one work with senior citizens and one to work with, other adults and children. But there would be certainly enough work for one to handle in our community.
Can I ask a very quick question in regards to that? Do you employ the best team at all?
Yeah, we work with Springwell and with Best. They will call, we'll call for outside assistance, but a lot of times what we're finding now is unless we're gonna Section 12 the person, they won't get involved. Which, for people that don't mean it, a Section 12 is that we're going to have them involuntarily committed to a hospital.
We had another related before. I know that Benny has a question, but we have another related question in the chat around whether or not the department had considered using peer recovery coaches or substance use counselors specifically.
No, we haven't. One of the I'll give you an example, like when we're talking about Belmont, and there's certainly people that reside in our community that need resources. But when the opioid crisis was occurring, and people would ask us, how many people do you have who are addicted and things like that, we would go to overdoses, and there would already be Narcan in the house and things like that. There's a lot of people in Belmont that are because they have means are receiving treatment. And so as far as peer counsels and things like that, no, we haven't. I don't think there's enough for us to go that route in the community. If we were more of like like Gloucester's a perfect example. Gloucester's got a big population of people between 20 and 35 and 40 people living together. Because of the housing market in Belmont, we don't, we see more intact families than people living on their own.
Thank you. I know Benny has a question, but I want to just be sure that everyone has the open invitation to put questions into the chat, and that way we'll know the order of questions, and Grace will share them with us. Thank you, Grace. But I think we can also have a pretty comfortable dialogue. If it starts to seem like some of us are taking up a lot of space, I can do that sometimes. So I'm not trying to be on good behavior. Then maybe we'll break it up, quote unquote, and move on to the next question. If you're unsure of how to use the chat, feel free to use your raise your hand, and I'll remember to come back to you. I'll keep track of that too. But Benny, take it away. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi. I was reading about this African American Commission on Mr. Brownsberger's website. It sounds like they make policy recommendations and things like that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I was curious, what incentive does any state agency have to implement any of their policies? Like, what gives that commission any power?
Moral suasion. I mean, look, it's not a commission that's intended to supersede the role of elected officials and executive branch officials in doing their jobs, but it's a commission that's intended to raise up the issues, raise up the concerns, create a focal point for concerns, and people will want to do what the commission recommends out of respect for the commission and concern for their reputation.
Okay, I was just a little concerned about the, the 30 or some odd Democrats that voted against the bill that we were talking about earlier. So in the face of that, the commission could seem a little maybe underutilized, perhaps, if their advice isn't taken. So that was my concern there.
Well, there's always going to be some folks that aren't going to take their advice, and I mean, you're right there. I mean, that's our problem. But I think this administration, the Baker administration, has a pretty close communication line with the Black and Latino caucus in the legislature, and a lot of what we did with criminal justice reform came out of the recommendations of the Black and Latino caucus. So the lack of formal power doesn't mean that it doesn't have power.
Thank you.
Alice, Alice has a question. So there you go. You're unmuted.
Is it my turn?
It is.
Oh, good. Hi. I just want to thank you first, Senator Will Brownsberger, for working so patiently to get something actually passed. I think a lot of compromise. And I do want to say, and I don't really know Representative Dave Rogers. I was a teacher in Cambridge for almost 40 years, so I know Cambridge, and lived in Watertown about the same amount of time. But I wanted to say to Chief MacIsaac that about 10 years ago, we at New Roads, it was St. Joseph, St. Luke's, we had a social justice committee. So for one whole year, twice a week, we had the community come. And a lot of the police from Watertown, from Belmont, and from Waltham would come. We had a course in all the things of the police, and it was housing and homelessness. But I do think I didn't hear you say the magic word for people like me, I was a teacher, to have the community part of creating kids who are feeling part of the community. Restorative justice, that we don't put the kids on when they're 9 years old, they break a window and then you put them on the line to go to incarceration. And I think that the responsibility for the community, and instead of criminal justice, the restorative justice, you were saying having people who are capable of working with the community and all the people. I just think that there are strategies that I feel that even people like me, who I'm retired, we need to be part of the community and part of not just saying, well, the police have to do everything. No, or the teachers. We have to, as a community, and I think in Arlington, they have the restorative justice. The chief of police is working with the group. Aaron Freeborn.
Yeah, so Belmont is part of Communities for Restorative Justice as well. And Belmont Against Racism had supported us a great deal in that. in that endeavor. So we do participate in restorative justice, and it's not just for juveniles. Adults can go in there, and there are Belmont volunteers that work with Erin and the restorative justice team. So yes, we do participate in that, and that is a great program, and that will never go away, as long as, especially as it's on the chief. I big
But I
believe.
just wanted to put it out there because sometimes people aren't really even aware that, like the social justice, we were working with the police, and I just think that we need to hold hands. We can't just say you're over there, and
That's right.
we need to be supportive. Anyway, thank you so much,
Thank you.
all of you.
I have a lot to say. One is, first of all, thank you all for being here. I think this is the first time growing up in Belmont that I have seen Bill Brownsberger or Dave Rogers actually, like, not in person, but kind of in person. And I had a couple, so one is I would love to see diversity on the Belmont police force. And I know that a lot of towns, I come from a family of folks who are both in the military or vets, or, my cousin's in Boston Academy right now. My aunt was a lieutenant in Milton. I wonder about, so I know, and I have a ton of friends in Cambridge and obviously in Belmont who are on the force. And I wonder about, I know that a lot of towns have a rule that you have to live in the town in order to work, right? And I get that in a lot of areas. I wonder if Belmont can do anything to increase diversity on the police force. So that's one question. The other is, so I'll let that go first and I'll ask my other ones.
Well, let me just speak to one thing that we do have. I mean, I think, I know Jamie feels, desires that, and we certainly have taken an interest in it as well. Dave and I have worked together on a bill Dave Rogers and I have worked together on a bill to make it easier to hire people who have had some contact with Belmont, but don't actually currently live in Belmont. So if you were graduated from high school in Belmont, for example, you are a METCO student, you would be able to take advantage of the resident preference that is built into the civil service hiring law. And so that's something we've been trying to do as a special petition to kind of respond to the Belmont situation, because at least we do have a METCO program, so that would bring some folks in. The other thing that's in this legislation, which was coming back to Benny, priority of the Black Latino caucus that was adopted in the legislation, was the creation of a commission to take a look at civil service and the structure of preferences and so forth, which may operate to reduce diversity in civil service appointed positions like policing. So yeah, that's an issue. We're trying to do some things about it.
So I'll thank you for the question. I don't know how close you follow things in Belmont, but we had kind of a rankus debate about civil service in September. And again, going back to when I was hired, the company that was hired to do the chief search, he said to me, he said, "Boy, you guys really dropped the ball." I said, "In diversity." I said, "How so?" He said, "You don't have any diverse department." And I said, "Well, are you aware of how civil service works?" And so this came up in the interview process. And I said, not only do we have a problem diversifying our department, we can't get candidates to take the test. Same problem that Wellesley had, same problem that Lexington had. So as you know, you get residential preference. We had 4 Belmont people on the list for 4 openings. You can't hire police officers fill 4 candidate positions fill 4 officer positions with 4 candidates. Now, I don't think post was necessarily listed. I mean, I don't think the reform bill maybe have been trying to address this, but Boston has civil service poses a totally different problem, because what happens with Boston is people move into the city for a year. And, it could be, anybody moves into the city for a year, takes the exam, and now, some kid that went to a Boston public high school, grew up in Boston the whole year, they're now behind that person. We don't have, it's sort of like what I talked about with that age group of people living in communities. We don't have a lot of 20, 30-year-olds moving to Belmont and then taking the exam. That would be great if we could do that. And as Senator Brownsberger talked about, that bill, again, I got to give Captain Hurt credit. We were at a Martin Luther King breakfast, and former Belmont High graduate said, "Hey, how do I become a Belmont police officer?" And we said, "Well, you have to move to Belmont. You have to live there for a year. You have to take the exam, hope that you score high enough, and hope that we're hiring that year." And Captain Hurt came into the office the next day, and he said, "I have an idea." I said, "What?" He says, "What if we opened it up to Metco students, that kind of preference?" And so that's how that came about. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult to get candidates. Lexington just pulled out. They have I think they had 300 people apply for 3 positions, and you can make criteria. You can give veterans preference, you can give residents preference, you can do all sorts of things. It's just not a hard and fast absolute preference, So.
Well, that's an interesting story there, Jamie. So you said, and by the way, I mean, Jamie really brought up, I mean, that's a very significant thing that Belmont's trying to do, which is a very difficult thing to do.
And for 1 year, right? Like who can really move into Belmont?
Exactly.
For 1 year, yeah, it's a different problem. But I mean, the story that of Lexington getting 300 applications. So they pulled out of civil service, and it just wildly opened up the applicant pool.
Yes. Yeah. And
there's got to be some good.
I had Fitchburg State has a great program where students graduate already academy trained. And I received an email from a young woman who had an unbelievable resume. She said, "Oh, I heard Belmont might be hiring." I said, "Unfortunately, we're civil service, so you'd have to move here for a year and take the exam." So, that's back in the 90s and 80s, we had lists that had 25, 30 people on it, 40 people on it. We're getting lists now with 4 and 3 people on the list.
And we got to address that.
We're definitely talking about civil service, which is a huge question, and we plan to have even more in-depth conversation about civil service in a future panel. So a little sneak peek. But I'm wondering if one of you, I think it's been explained fairly clearly, but if one of you can explain, maybe for anyone who doesn't understand exactly what we're talking about as far as civil service and how it works.
So
regarding the hiring of officers, sorry.
So civil service, when you have a vacancy, we every other year, usually in April, they give a statewide civil service exam. You go in, you take the test, and you list what communities you want to work in. So let's say I'm a Belmont resident, and I say, "Geez, I would really love to work in Cambridge. They get tremendous resources. They pay a lot." So I put Cambridge as my first choice. And I get 100 on the exam, and I come home and I say, "Wow, I got 100 on the exam. I'm going to be a Cambridge police officer." I'm behind the lowest scoring Cambridge resident. So I'd be behind, if a Cambridge resident scored a 70, I would be actually behind them, not only behind them, but behind any veterans that might be ahead of outside veterans. So you basically, people would ask me, "Why did you become a Belmont police officer?" Back in the 90s, there were even more communities with civil service. It was because I lived in Belmont, and that provided me with the best opportunity to be hired. So you hire, you go through the hiring process, you call for the list, they provide you the names. And if you want to bypass somebody, you have to articulate the reasons why you're not hiring that person. And that person has the ability to file an appeal with civil service. So you might get them back in another instance. And, and Belmont also, I forget the chapter, but adheres to an age restriction. And we had a candidate come in this year, African-American man, lived in Belmont, coached football at the high school, and he was too old. So we couldn't hire him. So those are the kind of restrictions that are put on us by civil service.
Belmont, oh, sorry.
I was going to call on Joe, but if you want to add something first, Sarah.
Wait, sorry. I have another question just in general. Well, another couple of things. And I don't know who this is directed to, but again, I have a lot of friends who are on BPD and in a lot of different places. And I noticed that when I talk about defunding the police, I talk about a lot of different places. It's not necessarily Belmont Police Department, because we all know what that building looks like and what it's looked like. And I know, firsthand, well, not firsthand, that, female police officers didn't have a place to shower and change, and, things were really bad. And I look at the funding that's going to the Belmont Police Department. I look at the funding that goes to the Belmont Public Schools, and I look at our town administrators and their inflated salaries. And I wonder how we make that better. Who do we talk to? How do we change that? We have someone as a town administrator who's making ridiculous amounts of money, and they've only been here maybe a year or two. And they got a ginormous raise, plus a car fund, plus this and that and the other thing. So I wonder how we fix that as well.
Maybe a
I'm not
former
sure anybody's
selectman
gonna
wants to
jump
take that
answer
question.
Okay, say what? Yeah.
I said, maybe a former selectman wants to take that question.
No, look, I mean, the compensation structure of public employees, I mean, it's always a conversation. It's always a conversation. It's always a conversation. And you can pick somebody out and say they're making too much, but what would they make elsewhere? So I don't want to, endorse a criticism of her compensation level, because I don't know that it's, I haven't studied it. So I really wouldn't necessarily jump to the conclusion that just because she's getting a pretty decent paycheck, that she's not worth it or something like that. So I'm not endorsing that comment. But if you wanted to address it, it's really entirely something within the control of the Board of Selectmen. They're the ones that negotiate the contract with the town administrator, and they're the ones who have a sense of what it took to bring her here, and what it takes to keep her here, and so that's it's a marketplace out there. And if you want to get people with certain kinds of expertise, you do have to pay for it. And that's kind of what it is.
I will say, to talk about, the terminology, defund the police. So, and I know Senator Brownsberger spoke about this at one time about, the Belmont Police Department budget is 5% of the overall town budget. We've actually been reduced unintentionally by 10% over the last 3 years. But I think what should be concerning to people with that language, with the defund the police language, is, if you defund the Belmont police, we're a great community. You know what I mean? We got great citizens. We got, just look at everybody working together. I think if you were to unilaterally defund police, say across our state, I think ultimately the people that are going to suffer are the people in inner cities, people in some of our cities, like maybe like Lawrence or Lowell and those kinds of places. They would certainly feel the impact of that.
They already do. I mean,
Yeah.
they feel the impact of an overinflated police budget, right? So not Belmont. I mean, I get it. Like smaller towns and smaller areas. I mean, I don't think it should be unilateral, and I don't think that language should be inflammatory. I think that people need to think about when a top cop in Boston who has been accused 25,000 times and has tons of complaints against him is making more than the mayor. It might be something to think about, right? Like, and that's in Boston. I'm not saying that's in Belmont. I know that Belmont needs, I wish that language wasn't considered so inflammatory, right?
I understand. And, it kind of gets back to where I should have followed my own advice and said, each community is a little different. We have, we fit in there. But that's just what, when I listen to, I've listened to people talk and say, say that if we defund these cities, the police departments, that, people would suffer. I have no intimate knowledge of the Boston police budget or Lawrence or any of those cities. That's just sort of a generalizing what I think that term can cause.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we're in really deep water, right? About, when you start talking about what is the right level of policing, and the answer is going to be different in different communities. There are going to be communities that are going to want to use the word that they're over-policed. But then there are plenty of people in that community that are not going to say that they're over-policed. They're going to say, hey, I need somebody to come because there's shots fired. And so there's a diversity of views within every community about what the right level of policing is. What I think is a reality.
Can I just very quickly say that a reality is that a lot of people don't know what that would look like because they've never experienced it outside of over policing. And I'm not, again, I'm trying to stick to Belmont, but I'm talking about other cities and other places. Over policing, and people don't know what else to do. They don't know who else to call if there's an issue. They don't know that there are other options because I don't think anyone's seen that in my lifetime.
Oh, no. Well, no, I think that's where I'm going, which is, there aren't a lot of other options. So there isn't is a community over policed or under policed? Well, what's definitely true is that there is a significant commitment of police resources, and there isn't that much else when it comes to problem solving resources. So you don't have an option to turn to. I mean, well, what are you going to do? Who are you going to call? You're going to call the police. So there's a conversation to be had about, should we be putting more resources into, alternative, new resources? And I'm going to say, I don't think it comes out of one pocket in particular. It's new resources into youth serving organizations, organizations that are there to respond to mental health problems, organizations that are there to respond to minor community problems. Police in this, are going to get involved sometime because, somebody's letting their dog, do its business on their lawn and on somebody else's lawn. I mean, and, police have to get involved in that. And is that the right response? Is that, so that's what, when I hear the sort of I don't think that the defund thing, that's a long conversation about the politics of it, but the one thing that I do hear that does ring true to me is that there are communities where there's a lot of police resources, but there's not a lot else. There's not a lot of other things that people feel as a kind of response mechanism. There are resources going into those communities. There's resources in the schools, there's health resources and so forth in every community in this state. Most of the state's budget is heavily tilted towards communities in need, but there's not a lot of community problem solving resources other than police in communities that do have high crime problems.
I wouldn't be surprised to see with the new administration that we see some hybrid models rolled out in some inner cities where we can study this and see how it works. Things take money, and maybe with President Biden in, this will be something that they fund on a trial basis and see what can work. I think if we could point to a community and say, hey, the work's great there, let's do what they do. And, so we may see something in the next couple of years along those lines.
I wish I had as much promise as you do, because I feel like the left wing and the right wing are all part of the same bird. So I have a hard time with that, but I hope to goodness, I look at Cambridge and I see a giant tank and I'm like, that's interesting. Why do they have a giant tank? I get it. I
think Dave was trying to respond as well. So definitely I want to invite you to do that. And then we have a bunch of questions in the chat as well. So after that, I'm going to call on Joe.
Yeah, well, I think, Jennifer, you mentioned it's the first time we've met, so it's nice to meet you. I think you bring up an excellent question. You're right. The term, it's kind of a nomenclature debate. The term defund the police has become very freighted, right? Incendiary, and the rallying cries from the right wing, particularly, and kind of laying to the side the ideological piece. I sort of would tie what you're talking about with what Latisha brought up, Ms. Johnson, that she brought up a lot of cross-cutting public policy issues. That is to say, we're talking about policing, right? But it's about systemic racism. I mean, and the impetus to do this was the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others. And so you have to talk about healthcare. You have to talk about nutrition. You have to talk about the quality of public education. You have to talk about housing. I see Rachel Heller's on here, who's a great housing advocate and the head of CHAPA. So these public policy issues, these societal ills, they don't exist in silos, right? It's part of a profound reckoning that I think our society is having, and thank God for it. And we're living through these really trying times, and yet I try to remain and am hopeful, that we have a new administration coming in, and the first female and African American vice president, and so I realized I'm getting a little far afield from this police reform bill that's the center of our conversation this evening. But your question, Jennifer, and again, what Ms. Johnson brought up is these issues are all interconnected. By the time that police officer shows up, how many things have happened in that human being's life with that one moment, that fateful moment of that encounter? And what do we need to be doing as a society to really make this a land of equal opportunity for everyone? And that's the stuff that I am passionate about working on, and I know all of you are. And so I just wanted to sort of comment, because your question, I think, touches on these larger issues as well.
Okay, Joe, you're still here? How do you unmute?
I am.
Perfect.
I am. Thank you. If you don't mind, I'm going to start real quick to just circle back to Jennifer's question about the budget and the town administrator. Just with kind of like a nuts and bolts answer is that, which Senator Brownsberger mentioned, but the town administrator contract is negotiated by the select board. So if you want to change that, you either change the members of the select board or convince the existing members that they need to change it. But that's sort of like the nuts and bolts answer on that. And then on the budget more generally, I would just mention that gets passed by town meeting every year. And right now is actually the time period where new or residents can pull papers to run for town meeting and get on the townwide ballot. And so, I mean, I would love to have more like-minded town meeting members. So I felt like I had to mention that. All you need to do to get on the ballot is get 25 signatures of registered voters in your precinct. And, we had 50 people on this call. I'm pretty sure anybody on this call that wanted to run, we could round up 25 signatures. So felt like I had to mention that. My question, which that's actually a good segue because it's sort of a budget question. The school resource officer requirement. This is a very sort of Belmont specific short-term type question, but so when does that require, or that change in the law go into effect? Does that go into effect for the upcoming school year? And so, we should be talking to the superintendent about that now, or what's the timing on that?
So
I have to double check, but I believe it's the effectiveness of it being a decision of the school superintendent is effective more or less immediately.
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Yeah. So just give my 2 cents on the school resource officer. I actually, we talked about this today on a podcast we were on. The way the law was previously written, if the town didn't provide a school resource officer, the state police would provide a school resource officer to the community. And my position on the school resource officer is I wouldn't just put any officer in that position. If I didn't have the right officer, it wouldn't be a matter of, we need a school resource officer, so I'm filling somebody in there. Right now, I think we have a tremendous school resource officer, and she's a tremendous resource. And, you know, I said today in the podcast that I had earlier today, I said, if she left, if I didn't have somebody that I felt comfortable in putting in the school, we wouldn't put them in there. And again, this is again, we get into communities. The school resource officer in Belmont, I'm going to imagine, is vastly different from the school resource officers in Boston and in the city. You know, our school resource officer isn't sharing information on gang affiliation and things like that with police intelligence communities. So it's a little different what the expectation is in Belmont and what the expectation is in cities, you know, and in larger communities. So that's generally, you know, that, you know, my take on that.
Okay, appreciate that. If I could ask one other sort of timing question to jump off of the school resource officer, curious about the timing of the civil service, the commission to study civil service. Like when is that commission going to be formed? When are they expected to have a report? I'm anticipating more civil service conversation in Belmont this year, and I don't know if it might come up that we, you know, maybe need to wait for this commission's report or something like that. So anyways, I'm just curious about the timing of that.
And how do you,
You know
get
what?
on the board? Or how do you get on the commission?
Well, by the way, Sarah, I put in the chat, but I think I can only chat to you. I put in a link to resources.
I'll put it so that everyone can see it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you,
and
Grace.
Thank you very much. That page has links into the bill. Now, on a question like this one with effective dates, that is something that has probably changed a little bit. That was one of the things that the governor did, was move some of the effective dates back just to give some time. That Civil Service Commission, I'd hate to see Belmont feel like it was waiting for that, because commissions like this, even when you give them deadlines, they don't necessarily hit the deadlines. And even to get started, or even to much less to actually finish their job, because what are the consequences if the commissioners don't finish writing their report? It's not like they're going to get failed and won't be able to go to college. In reality, the thing is sometimes these things drag on. So I wouldn't encourage people to wait for that decision. And I also think, coming back to what Jamie said, the issue of civil service is an extremely different issue in different communities. So Belmont, I think, needs to make a decision for Belmont, and I wouldn't be encouraging them to wait on this overall commission.
Yeah, I'd have to also,
To answer your question, it'll be a year or two before that thing is done.
That's helpful to know. Thanks.
Yeah, I think many of the commissions had at least originally an obligation to form, undertake a study, and produce a report and recommendations by 12/31/21, by the end of this year. But the governor did make some recommendations on that. I, as Senator Brownsberger said, have to double check the date that they're required. But these are real commissions. There's occasionally commissions formed, frankly, in legislation that never do a lot, but there are a lot of eyes on this. It's a high profile, and I think these are commissions that are really going to churn out significant advisory recommendations. And I believe the legislature in turn will act on many of those recommendations.
By the way, I agree with what Dave said. Absolutely. This commission will have a lot of eyes on it, will have a lot of accountability. And so I think it will get to end of job. But will the legislature get to end of job in terms of adopting any of its recommendations? Civil service is a really tough conversation. You get the veterans lobby coming in, and it's I don't know whether we'll be successful in doing something big on civil service. If we do, that will be one of the biggest things we do in whatever session we do it in. It'll be a big deal. So that's just by way of emphasizing again that if Belmont wants to make a move on this, they should go ahead and make the move. They shouldn't be waiting for the commission and then, by the way, the legislature to get around to doing anything. Not to knock what we do, but this one I just know is a heavy lift.
So I am Grace. So this might be a question for Chief MacIsaac, but it also may require like a legislative solution. So I want to know what the Belmont Police is doing concretely to find out if any of Belmont officers were at the riots last week. Concrete steps that you're taking to find out if any of your officers are involved in white supremacy groups. And also, this is a question from the chat, around what the hate speech policy is, what are discipline steps in place for officers that use hate speech?
So we didn't have any offices that I'm aware of that were in Washington, D.C. I don't think we did. I haven't heard anything. I don't have any reason to believe any offices were in Washington, D.C.
Were there any concrete steps taken to find out?
Well, no, not really. I don't know, by concrete steps. I guess tomorrow I can ask everybody to submit something, but I didn't have anybody on vacation or anything over the that time period. I guess somebody could have run down there on their day off, but not to my knowledge. We had anybody on there. I would usually hear something from somebody. That's how usually we find out. But I'll certainly ask. I don't, and they'd have to give me an answer. We have a professional standards division, which is, we say it's a division. It's really, probably two offices that are supervisors. We investigate every complaint that comes in. We have terminated, or not, well, we've gotten to the point of terminating. Most of them resign when offices reach that level. We recently, as a public records request, released all of our internal investigation statistics, names, if you will, going back to 2010. We follow up every complaint and that comes in. We do an investigation. One of the things that I'm hoping for from one of these commissions is that every department works on the same policy. In terms of internal investigations, how they're conducted. We're going to turn all those records over to Post by July 1st of this year. They're supposed to be turned over to them. And, I'm not concerned about anything in there. We've certainly had offices over the years that you certainly could see the buildup coming. And, when they were separated from the department, it wasn't a surprise. And, that's generally how every police organization, police department in Massachusetts operates. They have a professional standards division. You investigate every complaint, and we get back to the people who complained or had a complaint and let them know the outcome of it. And that's generally how it works. I will, I will ask, people if they're at the protest down in the Capitol, but I'm surely confident we didn't have anybody down there.
Can I add, I had posted this in the before questions, then I erased it because I figured it wasn't about Belmont, so I wouldn't talk about it. But again, I have a lot of friends and family who are police officers and have played on softball teams and fire and police. And someone I know from the Cambridge Police Department posted something pretty terrible, someone who I really like, or I thought I did. And it was, about crashing into protesters, to peaceful protesters on their personal social media page. I thought about it for a while, and this person is part of the community outreach program in Cambridge. So I thought about it for a while, and then I reported it, but I didn't use his name or their name because I felt that it would target me in one way. Also, I wanted to give them just kind of a heads up. Like, I don't necessarily believe he needs to be fired, or I don't know what needs to happen. But what I do know is that they need to be spending a little bit more time paying attention to the social media posts of their officers, who especially work in community outreach in a very diverse city. And that was kind of all I left it at. I never heard back because obviously I wasn't going to give any information about myself, but do you have someone, like, is there someone who monitors that? Like,
So, yeah, and I didn't fully answer your question. I think you asked if we had specific rules that covered these kinds of things. So we have a professional standards policy. And I know there's a lot of sort of catch-alls that cover a lot of things that need to be corrected through discipline. And one of them is conduct unbecoming. And that, what you described to me, I'm not familiar with in Cambridge, but that would certainly be a conduct unbecoming. If you brought that to our attention here in Belmont, it would be, and we would, begin an internal investigation, and there would be consequences. I remind our officers about every 6 months, especially the young officers, about social media posts. What you can't put on, you can't, a lot of things. Thankfully, knock on wood, we haven't had that. I think the officers know from hearing from a lot of different places of officers that have lost their jobs, have been suspended because they've tweeted something, or they put something out on social media that isn't appropriate. And so we do have our conduct policies cover on and off duty. So those are things that police officers are held to a higher standard, and they, they have consequences for things that they talk about. And that would certainly be something that there would be consequences for that officer if they were to put a social media post like that out there.
I'd also add there's a bill in the State House introduced by those who want to protect employee rights and civil liberties that seeks to essentially provide workplace protection for people for their social media, meaning we live in a free country. If what you do in your private life, what you post on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter is sort of your private life, and it shouldn't be used as the basis for an employment action, for not hiring, for firing, for not promoting. And some of the most strong advocacy against that bill comes from law enforcement, who do want the capacity to at least have some ability to monitor their officers and what they're doing. So I do know that at the management level of law enforcement in our state, they lobby against those protections for what you do on social media, saying, no, we want to be able to watch what they're doing. So it's see how it cuts both ways. I mean, a lot of us, I bet you on this call, believe in civil liberties and protecting employees, and but on the other hand, you see that if you have a police officer, Jennifer, as you're saying, commenting about driving a car into peaceful protesters, I mean, good God.
Laughing and commenting how it should have been more.
Well,
not just commenting.
I think Chief MacIsaac was being, and to his credit, being diplomatic and judicious, which I completely respect, but that's got to be a fireable offense, I would think.
We go as far as anybody who takes an outside employment, it has to get approved by the chief. So we do that. And I'm very big believer in, law enforcement, including myself. You don't want to, you want to be careful when you take sides, even politically. You won't, because if you have an officer, and especially in a community like Belmont, where everyone knows and they're out there, a big supporter of the A party, we'll say. And they show up to somebody's house and somebody says, well, I don't want to talk to you because I know what you're all about. And that's why those things are important for police officers to know and understand that, as much as, you might want to get involved or something like that, or put something out, and, it doesn't matter the affiliation. You really need to remain neutral so that, when you show up to somebody's house at 1 o'clock in the morning, you're not inciting an incident that, we want to be about de-escalating. The last thing you want is somebody to come in and say, hey, I've seen your social media posts and you're this, and this. So yeah, there are the consequences are there for that kind of behavior.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Rachel to unmute herself and ask her question.
Hi, thank you. Thank you everyone for this really great conversation. And thank you, Chief MacIsaac, for really just being everywhere in town and talking about these issues. I really do appreciate it. And thank you, Senator Brownsberger and Representative Rogers. Representative Rogers, I do want to thank you for talking about systemic racism, because I do think that so many of us on this call do not know what it's like to walk around this town as a Black person. And I can just tell you that having mixed race kids has certainly brought up a lot of questions over the last few months. And, where my son worries that he'll go to jail because he's Black. My daughter, wonders if I should call the police rather than her if we need help. So that's really hard, to hear. So I appreciate just the acknowledgement of that and the progress that we're making because our kids feel it. So, there's so much that needs to happen here and everywhere. And the police is a big part of it. And it's not the only thing. It's already been alluded to. I'll always talk about housing. Representative, you got me right. I'm going to bring it back to housing partially. There's a reason why our town looks the way it looks. And there's a reason why people laugh when we talk about the fact that you'd have to move here for a year before you could become a police officer. There's no opportunities for people here. We're very exclusive, and there's decisions that are made every day in this town, or every week, every year at town meeting, and we need to be more open. We need to create more opportunities, and that's the only, that is how we will actually start to change things. Fully on board with civil service and getting out of that and making changes here. But I think there's two things. We've got policy changes that need to happen, and we have funding changes, as has been alluded to. And I'm a town meeting member, and I know I'll get to vote on the budget, and that's great. The budget is being developed now, right? Like when is the time to advocate? Because we hear that the schools are interested in a diversity, equity, and inclusion staff person who can do an audit of the schools and make good recommendations, for changing things. A social worker. I don't know if you're advocating for it, Chief MacIsaac. I know you've got a lot of things that you got. How do we advocate for, the resources that you need? When is the time that we bring these things up at the town level so that we are putting those pieces into place that are going to make us a more inclusive and welcoming place?
So our budgets, generally, we submit our budget early, usually in October and December, for the year end in July. Unfortunately, right now, Belmont's looking at about an $8.2 million deficit. And so this override is going to take place in April. We have the Warren Committee. There's, you really, in order to advocate for certain things, you have to kind of be in touch, and, stay involved. But, that would, the select board is a great place to start. I will say, I'll steal a phrase. I heard a friend of mine who works in Boston police. He talks about the systemic racism in the police, and he said, he saw a picture someone did, and it was a giant glacier moving down a mountain. And the tip of the glacier was the police, but across in big letters, the middle of the glacier was systemic racism. And police officers aren't made in a factory. We come from the society that is America, and until we address through education, other places of employment, things like that, we may still have these problems, in law enforcement. But yeah, the Council on Aging is a place where that's traditionally has been where the social workers have been assigned. We do have a social worker who is in the Council on Aging who does do some work for us, but we were looking for a more, someone that's really part-time with us. But I think the select board is the way to start. They're the ones that basically, decide policy for the town, and can make it happen.
I heard you tell Dave you're nodding. I wasn't sure if you were pointing for that unmute button or if we.
No, just agreeing with the points made.
Okay. So then I will invite Yulia to unmute and ask her question.
Hi, good evening. Nice to meet everyone. Just to reiterate, also really excited for this laws to come in relatively quickly. I had a couple questions that are specific to Mr. MacIsaac. I understand you're probably under a lot of pressure and feedback. I was just curious. I was trying to understand, you said that you're advocating for an extra social worker. So I live in Belmont. And I was curious if you would have enough policemen, if you would basically replace one policeman with one social worker, would you still have enough sort of policemen on your team to do their job, or you actually need an extra person on your team? And to follow up on Jennifer's question about inquiring about whether officers were in the Capitol, etc. Is there like some guidelines you guys have, I don't know, from the state or from some agency on how to sort of track, I don't know, it sounds bad, track your people, or like basically like, yes, we can ask people sort of like, have you been there? And I'm assuming like, even if they were there, like there's really like no guarantee they're going to admit that. I'm not saying that they were there. I'm just saying it seems like it's sort of one-off thing. And if we have a systemic problem, is there's like a process that sort of helps us to deal with it, that sort of flags this kind of situations on a sort of systemic way, not like a one-off way. Yeah, so these are the questions.
Eliminating a police officer's position for a social worker, that's something that we certainly will look at. We do have minimum staffing levels that we had that all come into play, but that's, certainly I would like to have one outside without, having to eliminate a police officer's position. We also are in desperate need of a software specialist in the department as well. But yeah, that's something that certainly can be explored. As far as tracking officers off duty and things, a lot of this begins when you hire good people. You hope that they get the message from the top that things aren't tolerated, or generally I'm gonna knock on wood. I can't recall one of our officers being in trouble outside of Belmont, outside of the job, and we had to get involved. A number of years ago, we had an officer who had a problem with his neighbor, and he was disciplined for that. No, I mean, it never. When I watched the incidents unfold at the Capitol building, I mean, it never crossed my mind that there were police officers there. I just didn't think, and I certainly didn't think any of ours were there. But I don't, there's really, it's hard. People, they leave work and they have their lives outside of work as well. I think every police chief or any, was going to tell you the biggest fear is the things you don't know, right? Is the things that might be happening that you don't know. And you hope that your employees well enough and everything, that if you saw something coming or you saw somebody behaving in a way that you would be able to head that off. I just don't think we've had anybody that's been that passionate about the politics in town that they would have. I mean, at least not in hasn't been. I haven't seen it that would.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure it should be on your plate, and maybe this new committee is something that Jennifer could have referred to now if she finds out about this sort of behavior.
Yeah, that certainly would have had, anybody can go to post, as Senator Brownsberger said, with any kind of a complaint. So if you saw something on social media with an officer, you can go to this new commission now. And I think Senator Brownsberger didn't mention it, but this investigatory commission that's created is a law enforcement agency that gives them access to the registry computers, criminal history, things like that, so they could conduct a thorough investigation. If they had to call down to Washington DC and say, hey, we saw this license plate down there, can you tell us? They share the information. It's not like they're dealing with the Civilian Review Board or something like that. Am I correct, Senator?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so sounds like it should actually be on your plate at all at this point. Thank you. I have a couple more questions. There was other people in the queue, so thank you very much for your time.
So it's already 8:53. I think
Tom's hand up, and he's had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, I was the first one who posted the first question. Thank you to everyone who participated. I'll speak for about a minute, if that's okay. First of all, I live in Cambridge, but spend a lot of time in Belmont. I'm also ex-law enforcement myself. Chief James, if I can call you that, thank you for your contributions. I already like you better than our police commissioner, who seems to lose his temper at the public at every public forum. But I want to acknowledge Jennifer's concerns and the concerns of other Black people too. There's no end, there's no limit to public officials who say, we have a great community. But when people of color are treated like they're members of an invading army, they are not part of the community. And they're just not part of the community when that happens, let alone Dr. King's beloved community that he spoke of. Second of all, defund the police. Forget the semantics and focus on the substance. There's always employers, corporations, police departments, city departments, universities, and everything, where the only message is, the only way they listen is hit them in the budget. It's the only place they feel anything. And now that the slogan is going around, despite the semantics, we have people's attention. So pay attention to the substance, please. And I'm speaking to everybody there. Finally, I'm going to ask my question, which is for the chief, but other people can answer too. Why did so many police try to overthrow the US government last week? And what does it say about the state of policing in the United States? Thank you.
I generally will stay in my lane. I don't, as you mentioned, you were someone who was in law enforcement. I always usually tend to wait, whether it's a school shooting or anything, for an after action report that's done. All I'll say, and I have no more knowledge than anybody else here that watched it on CNN or one of the news channels. I don't have any, I don't know how many police officers were involved. I've read that 15 were maybe suspended from the Capitol Police. And I do know that a police officer lost his life defending the Capitol. So,
and one who committed suicide a couple of days later.
I really am not in a position that I can comment on that. We're a large country, as we know. There's different police cultures throughout the state of Massachusetts. There's certainly different police cultures throughout the United States of America. And I don't, I really couldn't, comment or offer anything of substance to your question.
And can I just add very quickly that, first of all, Black people can speak for themselves. So I appreciate your energy, but we can speak for ourselves. So you don't have to speak for us.
I'm speaking for myself too.
Okay, but you were referring to Black folks. And then secondly, some of us, I mean, all of us, I'm sure, are terrorized by what happened last week. Some of us are still very raw from that. So bringing that up with the Belmont Police Department that is very small, which again has had its problems, but is almost harmful. So I would just kind of be aware of your surroundings, particularly because I don't know if you were here earlier and heard the questions and heard the answers, but you might be repeating something else. And I just want to be mindful that you could be causing harm rather, instead of your intent and your impact could be different, is what I'm saying.
Thank you, Rava, so much for bringing that up, because that's something that we all need to be mindful of when we discuss what happened last week. And I appreciate that. And well, it looks like we have perfect timing. We're just so classy like that, everyone. And Rava, thank you so much. I'm so excited to have started the call chatting with you and ended the call with your voice, because I could listen to Rava speak all day long. And thank you so much to our panel. I really appreciated your time. And I loved this dialogue, and I'm looking forward to continuing the dialogue. I'm going to share a little spreadsheet with questions. So if anything comes up in the next week or so that you'd like to connect with our panelists on, we can certainly continue the conversation. And I invite you all to check out our website, cosnewengland.org, so that you can please attend our next panel in February. More information coming very soon. And I can't thank all of you enough, and I can't thank our panelists enough. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. And here's to lots of
Thank
hard work
you.
together in the coming year. I'm excited to keep working with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Everyone.